We are live. Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Whether you're here live with us tonight or you're watching the recording, I'm so happy that you're here and you have decided to gather a little more information about tonight's topic on Ask an Expert. My name is Amanda Rabluski. I'm a licensed clinical social worker at Boulder Community Health, and I coordinate what's called the Pillar Program. The Pillar Program exists to provide education and navigation around the care continuum for substance use disorders, and organically that comes along with navigating behavioral health disorders as well. So if you or a loved one, somebody in your circle is struggling, please don't hesitate to reach out. I will be facilitating tonight's discussion, and I will put my contact info in the chat box that should be right under your screen where you're seeing me, and we'll see the slides. So please feel free to enter questions, thoughts. We can make this a discussion. We don't have to save all of our questions until the end. So anytime that strikes, please feel free to enter that into the chat. Additionally, sorry, I'm doing a little bit of housekeeping before we jump in. There is a survey that we would love for you to fill out. We are grant funded, so shout out, thank you to our funders at the City of Boulder. And collecting information and data just helps to inform us of our impact and how we're doing out in the community. It lets us know who's tuning in, what topics you want to hear more about, and just how the information is getting to people. So it just takes maybe 2 minutes. If you have a couple extra minutes after tonight's lecture, please consider filling that out for us. I would very much appreciate it. But like I mentioned, my name is Amanda, and Ask an Expert is an educational series that covers some really big topics. A lot of things like addiction, trauma, mental health, anything to do with treatment, recovery, pain. We have about an hour, so we won't answer all of the questions, but hopefully you'll walk away from this, either this live recording or this live stream or the recording, with some new information that will help you or somebody who's struggling. One of the themes of all of the Ask an Expert lectures, I hope, is a message of hope, that there's a lot of hard things that people experience, a lot of things we don't talk about. And so inviting those discussions out of the shadows, not giving them the power to be unspeakable, and giving people hope that recovery is possible is it's actually my biggest goal with these lectures. So I hope that lands for some or all of you. Tonight, we welcome Sbanotto. He is going to tell us about sex addiction and a lot of the interacting addictions and the neural pathways that are at work when people are engaging with these different addictions. He's very qualified, and I will let him tell you more about his experience and the fantastic work he does. So stay tuned. He will be on camera in just a second. And thanks again.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sbanotto, and I am very, very pleased to be able to join you this evening. And what a topic we are covering, and what an honor to be invited to talk about this topic with sex and interacting addictions and multiple addictions. And then I wanted to get extra nerdy and throw in the 4 neural pathways of addiction. And Amanda, thank you so very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. This is,
of course.
I am a nerd, and I love being nerdy. And then if we have all these people that are joining us, I'm just going to assume that they're nerds too, so I'm in good company. I love being able to talk about stuff and educate. I've been a therapist now for about 15 years, and I guess going on 16 years now, but before that I was a teacher. And I love getting a chance to blend those kind of 2 careers as the educator and the clinician together. My background in the clinical space is I do have a master's in counseling. I'm a licensed professional counselor. And then I'm a CSAT, a certified sex addiction therapist. And then I'm a CSAT supervisor in that. So I have the really distinct honor of getting to train therapists that are in their training process. They're going through the certification to become a CSAT, and they are required to have, as I was, have a supervisor along the way that they are meeting with for at least 30 individual supervision hours. And so now I get to do that. I love that. I'm a certified multiple addiction therapist, a CMAT. And that really is, that CMAT and CSAT is really where the blend is going to come from today's conversation. And my understanding and experience of working with individuals who have that combination of multiple interacting addictions. And that's our topic. If you see the slide there, you'll see there's a couple other acronyms there, RAE, R-A-E, and then RACS. What those are, and I do want to say I'm very excited to have them because they mean a lot to me, even just personally, is RAE is Rainbow Advocate Educator, and then RACS is Rainbow Advocate Clinical Specialist. And I myself identify as a gay male, but I really have a passion for working with anyone on the rainbow. Anyone in that LGBTQ plus IA2 sphere. I just really being able to work with marginalized individuals that maybe don't get the particular care that they're needing. And so I was very intentional of wanting to get those additional certifications because I don't think just being a gay man means I know everything about even what it is to be other gay men, much less everything else on the rainbow. And so I wanted to really get more additional training. And so those are very near and dear to my heart. I am the clinical director for Acqua Colorado. We are a newer to Colorado, that is. It's been around for about 15 years in Utah. They're a residential program, residential PHP, IOP, that's substance and mental health, dual diagnosis, trauma in Utah. And we've been helping them expand that into Colorado.
Stephen, what are PHP and IOP?
Great question. So in fact, that's exactly the levels of care that we are, PHP and IOP. And what that stands for is partial hospitalization program. Basically, if you want to just think of it, that's kind of a step below residential. And then IOP, intensive outpatient, which is then another step below that. And it's, if you think of IOP as kind of really just a step right above standard outpatient. And so we provide those two levels of care here in Colorado, PHP, IOP. And I'm the clinical director for that. And we are actually located in two places, Boulder and Fort Collins. And if you have any more questions and y'all want to reach out to me about that, let me know. Happy to chat with you. I'm gonna just dive in here. First, I want to give credit where credit is due. Much appreciation goes to Patrick J. Carnes, PhD. His contributions for decades to the field of sexual addiction in general, helping us better understand addiction as a brain disorder and larger pattern of intricate connections that, when examined more closely, help us better understand the amazingly diverse and complex individuals with whom we work and walk with out of active addiction and into life-giving recovery. I had the honor of training under Patrick and his daughter, Stephanie Carnes. Patrick started the International Institute for Trauma and Addiction Professionals. It's known as ITAP. And now, as he's getting up in years, his daughter, Stephanie, has taken over as president of that institute, and I got to train with her. And now, actually, just as of, this is brand new, just in the last few months, I'm now on faculty for the institute, and I get to teach for them as well. I get to teach substance use disorder treatment, and I love that. And for anyone who's familiar with Dr. Kevin McCauley, if you've ever heard of Pleasures Unwoven, he did that video probably 16 years ago. He's my co-teach. I get to co-facilitate with Kevin, and
how exciting!
I'm starstruck. When Stephanie called and said that I got to work with Dr. McCauley, I'm like, oh, I'm so excited. So he's pretty amazing. All right. Most of you on this probably know this, but just a real quick primer. Addiction is a brain disease. It is a brain disease that is expressed in the form of, and I find this particular, because there's so many definitions out there of addiction, but this particular one very simple and maybe even simplistic, But I loved it because it's from the former director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. Okay, so an institute focused on substances, but his definition was very intentionally broad. He's not saying expressed in the form of substance addiction. He's saying compulsive behavior in general. Whether that behavior is the disordered use of a substance or the disordered use of a behavior, the disordered patterned behavior that then the person experiences as, and these are the hallmarks of any addiction, obsessiveness of the mind, that preoccupation, like so much space rented out to thinking about it. And again, that could be thinking about using a drug, but thinking about behaving in a certain way. But it's preoccupation to the point of true obsessiveness. It's compulsivity. The person is describing an internal, something in them feels compelled to do it. Even if, and I love parts language, I love IFS, even if it, as multiple parts of them are in conflict, and that person will even say, a part of me doesn't want to, and a part of me really wants to. And I often then, what they then describe is, and then the part that wanted to wins because I can't stop and I feel out of control. So that's another hallmark of addiction. And so when we're thinking of obsessiveness of the mind, compulsivity of behavior, the experience of out of control, that powerlessness, whether you're a 12-stepper or not, we think of, the first step. Often individuals said, we came to admit that we were powerless. Our lives have become unmanageable. Whether that's powerless over alcohol, methamphetamine, sexual behavior, gambling, the list goes on. I love that this definition from someone, and this is actually now an older definition. A lot of people think that behavior addictions is relatively new, and it is relatively new, but it's actually nowadays been around for quite a while. We've been talking about process addictions, behavioral addictions for long enough, and he's not been the director of the Institute for some time now. So that definition of in the form of compulsive behavior has really been out there for quite a while.
Sounds like that was a little bit ahead of its time. He could
exactly
see it on the horizon.
Yeah, I actually think Alan Lushner was exactly ahead of his time, which I very much appreciate. All right, I'm a bit of, I already mentioned this, a nerd, but I also am very nerdy when it comes to astronomy. In high school and then again in college, I was actually in an astronomy club. I had multiple telescopes. I loved astronomy. And one of the biggest things I was always, and still am, fascinated about is black holes. And I found this a very useful description of what we're going to be talking about today. Definition of a black hole: a celestial phenomenon. When a massive star collapses from its own gravity, a black hole has such a strong pull that not even light can escape it. Now, I could wax eloquently on that for hours, but we're going to say, okay, so what does that have to do with our topic? Well, the black hole of addiction interaction. What is addiction interaction? It's an addiction phenomenon where multiple addictions combine to overwhelm a person with their complexity and their power. Think black hole, that it collapses under its own gravity. That's power. And the phenomenon is so strong that no specific focus is strong enough to escape from it. Meaning, when there are now multiple areas in which the person has become addicted, and I'm going to give the analogy, and I will blend my mammals, because sometimes you're going to hear it call me a whack-a-mole, and other times it's going to be the gopher. So it's moles and gophers. All right, whatever mammal, little varmint that it is. The idea is that now we've got a gopher that is coming up in multiple places, and the individual is now describing that, or I should say the individual may not yet know. They in fact may be solely focused on, it's just, if I could just go over this cocaine thing or this methamphetamine thing, it's the substance, that's what the problem is. And certainly not going to disregard or minimize that it's a problem. But often what they may not yet realize, or sometimes they come in my office and they do have some recognition that it's this and it's this. Yeah. And maybe it's this as well. And now they've got multiple areas of their life that have become addicted. And this phenomenon of addiction, this multiple addictions, when they don't, and here's the thing, we're going to talk about this, so I'm getting ahead of myself, but addictions never just exist in the same universe as one another. They never just exist in parallel. They always interact. They always enmesh with one another. And so treating, and that last line is really the point, that no specific focus, meaning, you know what, I'm just going to get sober from X. No specific focus now at this point, because it's truly multiple that have gotten interwoven, no specific focus is strong enough to escape from it. Yeah.
That makes sense. I've often described it very similarly as like the little Dutch boy in the dam.
Yes.
You plug one leak and another one pops out. Yep, exactly.
And you got your toe sticking in a hole. Yeah,
just
absolutely.
trying to keep it together.
And they often do for years just
it
try
works
to
till
keep
it
it
doesn't,
together.
right?
And in fact, I love that analogy, because if the person actually were to relate to that analogy, then that gives me a really beautiful opportunity to say, I bet you're exhausted.
Yeah.
I bet you're exhausted. I also get to genuinely say to the person, especially as they've now described to me, probably more than 5, usually 15, 20 years easily, maybe more. I get to not only say, I bet you're exhausted, but I also get to say, damn, it's impressive how you've been able to keep the, kind of things from falling about, until usually, of course, then they call me or they land in some sort of treatment, and no one comes into treatment on a winning streak. So we know things are clearly not good at that point. And then we clinicians have what's called that precipitating event. We're always looking for, what was the last straw that you called me? Because things have been bad, it looks like, for 20 years. Something real bad had to happen that you were like, I think I'm ready.
Yeah. Right.
And boy,
there's a difference there too.
There's a difference,
between
that readiness
and being ready.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to talk about Jonathan. Okay, we're going to give this discussion of Jonathan and what is his story. And this is actually based on a true story. Patrick actually worked with tons of Jonathans over the years at multiple treatment centers, though the one that Patrick Carnes is now kind of most known for is Gentle Path at the Meadows. Gentle Path is the kind of one of the premier sex addiction residential programs, part of the Meadows kind of, they've got lots of treatment centers, but Gentle Path at the Meadows is a phenomenal place, as is Pine Grove in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and then there's another one I'm blanking in Utah, but Paradise Valley. There's some really good places if you need that highest level of care. Reach out to me and I can get you guys plugged in. Jonathan. All right, well, a little bit about Jonathan. Well, he's a race car mechanic. He's in love with the travel and the romance of his career. And he would later, down the road, admit how much he was hooked on the stress and the excitement of his job. More about that later. Eventually, travel, drug use, compulsive infidelity, so lots of sex outside of his marriage, created so much chaos. And something you'll need to know, by the time this kind of little vignette was being created, Jonathan, this is his, in fact, 3rd time in treatment. He's gone twice before. He has relapsed immediately. In fact, it was within days. Both times he relapsed on substances, at least that we knew of. And so we're building a little bit of a case study here of Jonathan. A little bit more about Jonathan. So during treatment, so he's now in treatment for that 3rd time. And I will say, he is now in treatment at a program that has a CSAT, someone who is certified in sex addiction, and they are trained, I think, or also a CMAT, so they're trained to look for multiple addictions and addiction interaction. And Jonathan did not know what he was getting himself into, because these therapists at this treatment center that had this training and had this lens by which they looked at things were able to help him connect with things that in some ways he was extremely in need of connecting with, and in other ways he was like, how dare you, I'm not ready. He was early on like, I don't want to talk about that. In fact, Jonathan was the classic case of, I'm not here to talk about blah, blah, blah. I'm just here to talk about my cocaine and heroin. And that was it. I just need to get sober off of my substance. Keeping in mind, Jonathan has done that twice before. He's gone to treatment, completed treatment. He didn't, leave against clinical advice or anything, or early. He wasn't like dropped because of insurance. He completed treatment. And both times within days, he's relapsed. Something's missing. This is his third time. So during treatment, he was having a hard time focusing. So many problems in so many places. He admitted to constantly using various types of drugs, including heroin and cocaine, since he was about 11. This is a long-standing, because he's now 48. He's now 48. His deeper problem, and this is what he's never worked on, was compulsively hiring sex workers. He's been married for 10 years and he has 3 young children. He does not want to acknowledge his sexual behaviors are far more compulsive, problematic, and that it interacts with his substance use. He's not ready. Not yet. And he's convinced that he only acts sexually when under the influence of his substances. I hear that a lot. In fact, I hear that as often I can't possibly be a sex addict because I only do it when I'm high. And I absolutely want to say, is it possible that if you only act sexually when you're high on a substance and you've never done it when you're sober, that truly, if we just focus on getting you sober off the substance, that you may not have a sexual problem? Absolutely. It is totally possible. And I wish that I could say, but I can't, because in experience, what I've found is the number of individuals that they just wanted to focus on the substance. They then did get truly sober off of the substance, only to find the gopher coming up in that other hole twice as hard, 5 times as hard, 10 times as hard. It's now, in fact, that wasn't as out of control until now. And in fact, that poor little gopher was just like, I got to go somewhere. And so I just, with experience, that's where Patrick would often use the analogy also of riverbeds. And if you dam up one source of water to the riverbed, but you don't dam up another source of water, you've now dammed up just one source of water, but the rest of that water is still flowing down that riverbed. That riverbed is not drying out. Even though they've stopped using cocaine, the neuropathway, and we'll get into neuropathways, still active. And because at some point these became fused, and in the brain we have that phrase, things that fire together eventually wire together. And if I did this and I did that, and then I did this and I did that, and then eventually I started doing this and that, they start to wire together. And now, even if I stop one of the wires, the other wire is still active. Well, now they've gotten wired together, or I'm going to go back to my river analogy. The riverbed is not drying out. That neural pathway is every bit as, it's still wet. It's still there. And so admitting a sexual addiction weakened his position to spend less time in treatment. You remember he's done this before. This is his 3rd round. And he knows the ropes at this point. He knows what it is to get in and do that clinical intake and a master treatment plan. And then they're like, we recommend, 30, 60, 90 days, whatever it is, that they recommend. And he's saying, let me bargain. I want to negotiate how long I need to be in treatment. And the idea of saying that he has more than just a substance addiction, but that actually he has addictions in other areas of his life, weakened his position to spend less time in treatment. He knew that if he admitted to more, that they would say, we think you need a few more weeks in residential or whatever, or you're going to need a step down to PHP and IOP with a specific emphasis for the sexual, whatever. And he was not having it. He also had some secret relationship issues, as he would put it, to clean up with other women. These were some secrets that he's still holding on to. So, What did Jonathan's mean old group therapist say to him? He said, what? Well, there at the bottom, he said, if you do not stop and do the work, there is no point to having a chair in this group. We are talking to a dead man. Now, I should add, this therapist actually had a significant amount of rapport and alignment with Jonathan, or else he hopefully would never have said something quite so direct. But it was needed, and it did land. And it was also based on the fact that Jonathan had said previously in a group, he had said, I don't have another run in me. He'd said to the group, the therapist was there, and the very strong, vaguely veiled statement was basically, if I relapse, I die. And this therapist now knows we're talking life and death here. Yeah. Why are we holding punches? Why are we holding punches? If I hold punches, and again, with rapport and alignment, sure, right? But if I hold my therapeutic punches, what are we doing here?
Right.
This dude's going to die.
What have we got to lose?
Yeah. And in therapy, we call this a dead man walking. Mm-hmm. You know, this idea of, oof. We don't say that lightly. We don't want people to die. But also those of us that work in the field that have been to too many funerals. There's a point at which we're like, I care too much to not reflect back to you what I'm saying. Yeah. So this therapist said that. If you do not stop and do the work, there is no point to having a chair in this group. And keep in mind, I didn't say this, but the context is that this is also a group of men that were all there for the same thing, co-occurring, sexual and substance. They all understood one another. These were his men. These were his people. Mm-hmm.
That was like the safest place for
yeah,
him to
absolutely.
Talk about it.
Yeah, to really be able to dive in. Yeah. I didn't mention the stuff there, those bullet points. So the core of his addiction, this therapist actually reflected to him one day in therapy, Jonathan, you're actually addicted to your stress hormones. Your addiction is intensity. He says, you use the drugs to manage. In other words, he was changing the lens. He was changing the perception of you're addicted to heroin or you're addicted to cocaine. No, he was saying you're addicted to intensity. Cocaine and heroin serve a purpose in if we really pull back and we see a cycle of what this addiction, this pattern. Cocaine is a stimulant. Heroin is this strong depressant. And those play a role in his cycle. And then also his sexual behavior, particularly we're going to talk about the type of sex that he was pursuing addictively, was all about intensity. It was very much an intense type of sexual experience. There are some types of sexual experiences that are all about numbing and satiating that are actually much more akin to heroin. But his type of sexual behavior was much more akin to cocaine. And in fact, neuropathically, his sexual behavior was eliciting the same neural pathways as the cocaine. And so his core addiction is intensity and chaos. The drugs serve a purpose to help manage the addiction. And the treatment plan, at its most simplest, was could he possibly, this is very somatic, would you be willing to just slow down long enough? Would you be willing to just sit in the discomfort of slowing down and feeling for one damn moment? And giving your brain and your body a chance to start healing, because addiction to him was go, go, go. And acknowledging the multiple interacting addictions was going to be a key to his recovery, and it would be necessary for him to develop a more honest sobriety definition and plan. He had always said, I'm sober if I'm not using substances, but he could be sober, and usually, obviously, he couldn't stay sober for long, but he was still compulsively, addictively having sex with sex workers, and yet he would say, I'm sober, because his definition of sobriety was so limited in saying, I'm not using cocaine, I'm not using heroin, I'm sober. And for his recovery to really work, he needed to broaden his definition of what is sobriety to me. And then, if with a real honest definition, he could develop a plan from there. So Jonathan's terrible, horrible, no good, really helpful therapy group, the therapist suggested that the group make a list of what they knew so far about Jonathan. Okay, so this is Jonathan's day in the hot seat. And this therapist is not letting up. He's like, Jonathan, would you be willing to let the group give you some feedback? And Jonathan said yes. Yeah, sure. I trust these guys. They get it. All right. Or they sort of get it. I don't know. I don't know if they're really my tribe. He's still in the I'm a rare and unique butterfly.
Terminal uniqueness.
Yes. Terminally unique. Absolutely. But sure, we'll see what these guys can come up. So his group put up on the board. They put up on the board all of these things they knew about him. Okay. They knew that he's used drugs constantly since the age of 11, that he saw his first prostitute at the age of 17. Prostitutes or sex workers are one of his, this is pretty key, one of his principal sources of drugs, which, by the way, is extremely common particularly I see it with meth, but also, injectable heroin, cocaine. These are things that commonly the sex addicts that I work with, if they also have the compulsive sex workers, I have to just ask straight up, are you getting it from the sex workers? And often the answer is yes. In fact, I had a gentleman who had been a meth addict for over a decade. He had never purchased his own meth ever a day in his life. He's only ever gotten it from sex workers. Yeah, only ever. Never spent a dime directly. He spent a lot of money.
Right.
A lot of money. Jonathan has a semi-rock star status in the race world, with women approaching him wherever he goes. Interesting, his rock star status, women approaching him wherever he goes. He has very convoluted relationships with women that he rescues, including some torturous ones with some of those prostitutes who have taken him for lots of money. His wife was a race car fan who fell in love with him, but also had a troubled life. He was her shining knight at the time. He rescued her. His national and international travel created even more instability and lack of accountability. He's just always on the go, always going. And keep in mind, he's got a wife and 3 kids at home. He loved the excitement of what he did, and this is crucial. Those of us that are clinicians, we learn to listen to language. Listen to this language. The thought of not doing it, this career, was like death. He said, I would die. It's like death. I can't imagine not doing it. And I love that he is that passionate, and I can't not notice that language, like death. Okay. He grew up, okay, for those of you in the crowd that are more family of origin, psychodynamic, let's go there for a bit. He grew up in an alcoholic family in which he would take care of his mother, who was frequently battered by his father. He learned very early how to take care of women. He learned this is what he knows. He's got a very strong female woman got to take care of them part by being the person who comforted his mom. He was deeply resentful toward his father, which in his case, and this isn't always the case, not everyone that has father issues does this happen, but it is certainly not uncommon, and it certainly was true for him. It extended, it overgeneralized toward anyone who tried to set limits on him. So everyone in authority was a potential, FU to that person, not just his father. Jonathan was a master of the quick solutions. He's very good at problem solving, whether it be getting a car to run, pulling out of a scrape with a woman, finding drugs in foreign cities. He also loved being the hero in all of these situations. He now had hepatitis, which he could have contracted either sexually or with the drugs. And There's been 3 near-death experiences. And again, this is a guy saying, I only have a substance problem. But notice, all of his near-death experiences have involved drugs and sex, the last of which is what brought him to treatment. And he is 48 years old and has had a problem for 37 years, but he is now arguing over how many weeks to be in treatment. This is what his group said. The therapist just sat there. His group of men that really do care deeply, and they know he just told them, I think a week earlier, I don't have another run in me. This is a dead man walking, and he gave them permission. What do you know? And boy, did they know a lot. And they put it up on the board. And oh, I thought there was another slide. I'm going to skip these because that's a really cool psychodrama, which we don't have time for. Though I'm training in psychodrama, and I love it. It's super cool. So Jonathan has an epiphany. He finally sees that fixing just one thing, getting sober off of, cocaine and heroin or whatever, that substance, would not stop this much larger process. They were all hooked together. And then going to the right, when he admitted that he saw it was all actually just one big problem, and let me explain that here in a bit, and that it all just came out in different ways, the group smiled. His therapist said to just focus on your chemical is why you relapse. And Jonathan would need to understand how they are all hooked together. And hooked together is just another way of saying interacting. So when we say addiction, interacting, multiple addictions hooking together, they are then becoming that black hole that, because it's so, addiction's already powerful. We came to admit we were powerless over just one thing, alcohol. That's already enough. We were powerless. We could not stop ourselves. Step 1. But imagine when it's now multiple and they're hooked on and they're interacting. Boy, that is a black hole that, again, to now focus just on one of those, how do you unravel that? You can't. Right. And that's why when Jonathan said, I see why I keep relapsing. Of course, they're all hooked together. So.
I really love the term you used of what fires together, wires together.
Yeah. And we know that to be true, of course, now with just the neuroscience of addiction. And actually broadening that way beyond the neuroscience of addiction, though, of course, it's very applicable, but just the neuroscience of human behavior. We know that things you do together over time eventually wire together. And now when I do this, I kind of do this too. And at some point, and we have these terms called fusion. Fusion's a term, particularly we use it in addiction, but really it's just an idea of when two kind of synapses have now fired enough together that, let me describe, partial fusion is when it's not fully fused, it's partially fused. And the person will describe this behaviorally. They experience partial fusion as, I can do this without doing this. I like doing them together, but I don't need to do them together. So an example could be cocaine and compulsive masturbation. Pretty common, actually. Cocaine and compulsive masturbation. Some individuals will say, I prefer to do them together. And let me just give you a little heads up. When individuals pair cocaine, a stimulant, with chronic masturbation, what that cocaine does in the brain is create hyper focus. Now the world fades away on cocaine. Boy, they are hyper focused, and it is now probably porn and then masturbation, and they will go for hours. We're talking 20. Yeah, that's the reaction you need to have. It is not just a little bit longer binge session. This is a stimulant paired with masturbation. This is now becoming 20 hours. These are individuals that are damaging their penis. Right. They're going to the emergency room. This is a problem.
I was going to say the toll that's got to take physically.
Absolutely.
Has to be
pretty
significant.
Yeah. And I should say it's not just men. So a woman pairs cocaine and masturbation. This is damaging to the genitalia. It does not care about gender. Right. And so we have that. But if an individual to say, I can do one without the other, I just prefer to do it together, we'd call that partial fusion. There's a point at which, though, an individual say, I don't remember the last time I did one without the other, I can't. Now, if that same person were to say to me, I don't think I could masturbate without being high on coke, and I can't take coke without then masturbating. I just can't do it. In the brain, what we would now say is if I hooked them up to an fMRI, I would see, if I could find it, I would see that zip, zip, vunk, and now the person is saying, I can't. Right. It's fully fused. It's fully fused. So these are things that are pretty powerful, obviously, from a brain perspective. So understanding multiple addictions. How are we doing on time? Oh, yeah.
Got about 20 minutes.
Cool. To addicts, these multiple addictions and the ways it has damaged their brains feel normal. Our story of Jonathan is a good example because he fits so many of the typical patterns. He had addiction in his family, so there's a genetic component. It's not enough to cause him to become an addict, but he is predisposed. And also not just genetically, he grew up in a family of dysfunction, so socialized. He, just lived in the dysfunction, even if not genetically. I mean, I'm adopted, so I know the power of just nurture, even without nature. He spent much of his youth scared. We know that fear actually physiologically shapes the brain. When you grow up in the soup of fear, your brain physiologically changes. He started using very early at his brain's most vulnerable moments. Remember, 11 and then again 17 with his first sex worker. He exploits women like a drug and has little ability to be with them unless they need him in unhealthy ways. Remember mom. Remember mom. Consequently, he often feels used by them. Jonathan is an engineering genius and he loves the excitement of the race. He resents deeply, however, that the credit often goes to the drivers and the owner, even though without him, he would say they would not be winning. So he is driven by a deep resentment, yet is thrilled also by his own rock star notoriety. He uses drugs and alcohol to cope with the stress and even tells himself to improve his performance. Imagine this is an individual that sees cocaine as enhancing his ability and then heroin as a way to now take off the edge. Mm-hmm. So the substances are serving a purpose in a much larger picture. Mm-hmm. How do you then, if you're the clinician and you're sitting there going, wow, this is a lot. How do you make sense of all these issues when they are so interwoven? What clients do you have or have you worked with that sound like a Jonathan, and where would you begin? A little bit on multiple addictions. Addictions compound by nature, morphing into something more powerful and biologically tenacious. So they will just by nature never stay long as parallel. They will eventually start to interweave. That is just the biological nature of them. Once the initial neural pathway, that riverbed, once one source of water has carved out a channel and another one comes along, other addictions then it becomes an overlay. Water always seeks the easiest route, and it's not going to go, oh, I see that other riverbed, but I'm just going to carve my own. No, water always goes, woo, and then it wants to find the easiest medium. Addictions are no different. They're looking for a neural pathway that's already laid down. So it's using the same circuitry. And we're going to go into this. There are addiction types, obviously substances. We've also mentioned process addictions or patterns of behavior. Compulsive attachments, which is actually patterns of relationships, when the relationships themselves are the addiction. And then also feelings addiction, which we will not have enough time to go into that one, but it's a fascinating study, a whole nother conversation. Sure. Here's a really handy dandy visual. So you've got your substance quadrant, you've got your process and things like food, sex and love, work, money, exercise. That's just a few examples. The relationship ones, I don't love the term codependency. I know that a lot of people, absolutely, that's a word that they personally have found as being very descriptive. I have my own thoughts on the usefulness of that term these days, but that's another topic. Co-sex addiction, that's actually an old term for someone that's in a relationship with a sex addict. Traumatic bonding, love addiction, romance, limerence. This is when actually the addiction is, I'm addicted to romance, or limerence, which is the kind of the early first few months when the chemicals are super high, but individuals will describe that they actually go from new relationship to new relationship, and they actually make sure they always have a new one waiting in the wings, ready when this one starts to peak and then come off. They're ready to start the new one because they have unconsciously learned to develop an addiction, but to keep their chemicals at a heightened state by jumping from new romance to new romance, and now they're addicted.
Staying in the honeymoon stage.
Absolutely, honeymoon stage. Yes, when things are still good. All right. Addiction neural pathways. I've been insinuating or inferring these, but I want to go into them a little more specifically. We have 4. There's 4 addiction neural pathways. There's the arousal neural pathway, and that does not have anything to do with arousal in the sense of like genitals or sexual arousal. It means arousal in the sense of when you use the term like, oh my God, I'm so aroused right now, as in like pleasure and intensity, like whoo, that rush. That is arousal. And I kind of just summarize that as, this is an individual, I want to feel something more than pain. Often if you're working with someone who their addiction is to this arousal neural pathway, they are addicted to pleasure, addicted to intensity, what you can maybe explore with them is what is the pain that they're trying to, but it's not numb. They want to experience something else that's better.
Anything but what they're feeling currently.
Yes. But that leads me to the next one, numbing, which is a different neural pathway. And this is much more the sedative, analgesic, and it's more the individual would say, I just want to feel nothing. And this is the numbing, knock me out. Yeah. Fantasy, also a little slightly different. And these do, please trust me, they all overlap. So it's not quite as clean as I'm making it sound. But the fantasy is also known, I often refer to the fantasy neural pathway as the escape neural pathway. Also, in some literature, you'll see it referred to as for those trauma therapists out there like myself, the dissociative neural pathway. This is I want to be out of my body. So fantasy is, I want a reality that's different than mine. Yeah. And so escape is the goal. And basically the phrase I kind of captured it with was, any other or another reality has to be better, is better than mine. And then there is this one, is also a conversation in and of itself, the deprivation neural pathway, when the addiction has become to depriving. We see this in the anorexias. The most common being, of course, the deprivation of food, food anorexia nervosa. But we also have colloquially, you don't find this in the DSM anywhere, but colloquially we'll have individuals that absolutely are addictively depriving themselves of sex or any intimacy at all. And it is actually and also there's spending, like money deprivation. There's actually individuals that will go into such deep, like they won't ever even like buy new clothes, a new t-shirt, new socks for 20 years. It's a form of anorexia, and it's tapping into the same neural pathway. It's deprivation, and at its core, and we see this most clearly in trauma victims who have developed some form of anorexia. Not all of them, I should say, but a lot of them will often describe in a world where everything else felt out of control. Where everything else was terrifying, they found one thing that they could control. Yeah. And for the food anorexic, they could say, you know what, if there was one thing that I could control, it was what I put in my damn body. And you know what, I needed, and this is a human experience, I I say, what a creative survivor you are. You found one thing to feel in control. Now it's killing you. But my job is to first, as a clinician, to understand what makes it make sense. Yeah. And if I can understand from their perspective, I found one thing that I'm in charge of because nothing else. Nothing else. And for my sex anorexics, they will avoid, and I don't mean avoid it as an aversion to the point of these are individuals that are physically harming themselves, okay? Men will come into my office, they have harmed their penis so that they will not be sexual. Women will often make themselves as unattractive as they possibly can because the idea of being seen as a sexual being, the risking the possibility that someone might see them as sexual. And so this is true sexual aversion. And it's, of course, we've now crossed into, they also will say, I can't stop. They're now describing all of the elements of preoccupation to the point of obsession, compulsivity, I feel compelled to do it, out of control, powerless. It's interfering with my life and functioning, continuation despite consequences. You know, these are individuals saying, I can't stop even when I try.
I love the
Deprivation.
Point. I love the point you made, though, that it's all, so much of it is born out of survival.
Oh, absolutely. We don't have time to go into that. So much of this, of course, underlying this is often so much trauma.
Yep.
Often, not always developmental in some way.
Right.
Though there's plenty of people who really did have great childhood, but something later in adult years, a relationship to some substance or behavior took on new meaning.
Right.
And now it was a solution to a problem that then became a problem.
Right.
Sure.
And just to be mindful of time, we've got a little less than 10 minutes.
Yeah, so I think these next few slides are just kind of saying a lot of what I've already said, with just a few additional, I'll just kind of highlight the pieces that are additional. So that arousal neural pathway, specifically that one. Things like high-risk sex, high-risk relationships, volatile, being constantly seeking often volatile, violent even relationships. Compulsive burglary and shoplifting falls into this category. Some individuals will say that on the edge business occupations or day trading, please let me say, I don't think that every person that does day trading is an addict. I am saying, just like I don't think every person that drinks is an alcoholic and every person that has sex is a sex addict. And some individuals have developed an addictive relationship to these things.
Yep.
Anything to do with violence and volatility is the arousal neural pathway. So the substances, of course, are going to be the things like the amphetamines, cocaine, ecstasy, etc. But also, these often enhance and combine with sexual behaviors and high-risk behaviors. Think cocaine or meth and sex. There's the opponent process of addiction, which actually, that's a fascinating conversation, but where pain and pleasure and pain are often, and individuals will describe that they need one to achieve the other. Incorporating pain into pleasure. Orgasm actually requires pain for some individuals. They cannot orgasm without it. And arousal requires maybe even risk. I need to be at risk of physical harm. And it's become, again, wired together. And you can think of even something as simplistic as, the Pavlovian, like the dog food, the saliva, the bell. Over time, you didn't need the dog food. You rang the bell and the dog salivated. This idea of these are things that wired together. And now the individual says, I can't without risk. I can't without pain.
Sure.
Okay. Numbing substances are alcohol and heroin and other things similar to that are considered your kind of numbing, depressant agents. Process behaviors would be compulsive masturbation. Certain forms of gambling, certain forms of shopping and overeating can all access the numbing neural pathway. Let me just give you a brief. The compulsive masturbation actually interacts. And this is not all masturbation. I am very much sex positive. I do not think that masturbation in and of itself is unhealthy, any more than I think that everyone that drinks alcohol is an alcoholic. And some individuals have developed a compulsive relationship to masturbation. And when they've crossed that line in the brain, what it is now eliciting is in fact an opiate receptor response. Compulsive masturbation is not about the feeling good. It is now an opiate addiction without putting an opiate in their body. They have developed an opiate receptor process addiction. Behaviorally, it is a numbing. I don't want to feel anything. Okay. Combining alcohol and compulsive eating, or with slot machines, we see that very commonly. These are numbing substances. For fantasy, escape, and dissociative, you're commonly going to see things like the marijuana, the psychedelics, or LSD. The process behaviors could be things like cruising. There's certain cruising behaviors. Individuals will drive around for hours and hours and hours, and it is a escape. They are, in fact, clinically dissociated. If you ask them to tell you where they were,
They can't.
they can't. They are truly clinically dissociated. Cruising in bars, and this can go for hours and hours, and they will not remember at time. These individuals will say, I could have swore I was there for 2 hours, and they were there for 7. They had no idea that the bar was closing and it's 3 a.m. They would have told you it was 11 p.m. max. They are dissociated. Watching porn can become a dissociative. Engaging in online sexual behaviors, sitting in a strip club for hours can be a form of dissociative for some individuals. Some gambling behaviors, and I mentioned the day trading. In gambling, there's the big win that will make everything better. There's a money obsession, the windfall fantasy. With drugs, the right high with the right stuff. That's the fantasy. Is in fact, I'm just imagining the perfect high is already eliciting dopamine. Cocaine addicts will often tell you that they're thinking about when they get home that they're going to start, dueling up the cocaine, and they're already getting high. They are already getting high. The brain is already releasing dopamine. So the fantasy is already there. With sex, it's the right person, the right situation, the cosmic relationship, the perfect one. And often in porn, what they're looking for is the porn that shows them the perfect scenario. Start to finish, he does, she says, they do all of the right things, and they found, oh my God, but they keep looking for the perfect one.
The unicorn.
And then I mentioned that deprivation pathway. As control is the goal, anorexic spending, sexual anorexia, food anorexia share a common assumption. Doing without is the surest way to defend against terror. I'm terrified. And if I can do without one thing because I chose it, I have agency.
Right.
Euphoric release, we actually know there is some serotonin and some dopamine actually released in deprivation. Feelings even of superiority and elation often intermingles with the first three. We often see forms of deprivation in cahoots with arousal, so that intensity seeking, often there is a deprivation somewhere else in their life. Humans have a tendency toward homeostasis. They tend to look for ways to remain in balance. So we as addiction therapists want to look for the thing that often brings them in is where they're out of control. Look for where they're also hyper controlling. Look for where they are balancing, and it's often over balancing. Of course, it's as out of control as this is, they are probably hyper controlling at least one other thing. Yeah. So I'm looking at the summary here of those neural pathways, and that's a great place to stop. Arousal is usually about pain. Numbing, this is oversimplification, but is usually about anxiety. Fantasy, preoccupation, obsession are usually about shame. This is a person they don't want to be in their own body because they don't like who they are. Anyone or anything or any place else is better than me. It's usually about shame, and I've already mentioned now, deprivation is usually about terror. A woeful oversimplification, but a helpful guide to be sure.
But digestible.
Yeah, that's what I want it to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's at least a starting point. And if you go down that road and find it didn't quite fit, fine, throw it out. But it's at least a place to say, I'm curious. As a clinician, I want to hypothesize and then see where it takes me.
I have so many questions. So many of them are like half baked though. And I want to give the folks online a chance to throw any questions or any thoughts in the chat. We're right at 7, but yeah, let's go a couple minutes over. We had a little bit of a lag the first few minutes. So if anybody has any questions, I mean, that was captivating. I kind of felt like I was drinking from a fire hose. That's why my questions, but it's great. It's, you know, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's things that we don't talk about just kind of out in the, like the zeitgeist, like the just
not commonly enough.
And even in therapy with your example, he wasn't going to talk about it.
Nope.
But the therapist clocked him, which great. That's their job.
Therapeutically clocked him.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, let the group do its job and give him that feedback.
Power of group therapy.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yep. Yeah.
So like if people in that space aren't feeling safe, my God, whoever would feel comfortable enough in some instances to say, oh, I think this is a problem.
Yeah.
But I really loved all of your examples of how, well, at a certain point, not, like I can't do one without the other. And again, with like these lectures and stuff, my hope is that those little glimmers start to kind of shine brighter.
Yeah.
And it's like, right. Literally the light bulb goes on.
Maybe have a sense of, I kept wondering why my client kept relapsing. And I'll own that in the 15 years I've been a therapist, how many number of times I still have that sense of the imposter syndrome. And I go back to, is it me? Maybe if they had a better therapist with more letters behind their name, they would really have been successful, but they relapsed. And what was it that I missed?
Right. And what did I do wrong?
Certainly. Yeah. Though the one thing I'll say, most of the time, it's really not what the clinician is doing wrong. It's we need to get out of that belief that we can fix our clients or that we can keep them sober.
Right. Oh, God, no.
And one of the biggest pieces, though, that I will say that I've learned as a clinician is my ability to assess for multiple areas where, because this guy, Jonathan, had been to really good treatment centers, really good therapists that he's worked with that had all the right intentions in the world and probably had great treatment plans. And he relapsed after both of them. What was missing?
Right.
What was missing? And this is an individual that kept each time just wanting to focus on, and also until that third clinician at that third treatment center said, we're talking to a dead man. Unless you really back up and look at, and let's let this group help you, or put it on the wall, and then you see, oh my God, if I just do another round of treatment and try to get sober off of heroin and cocaine, I'm going to die.
Yeah.
It's so much bigger than that.
It's so much bigger. And it's like kind of two things came up for me. A colleague one time said when we were talking about a mutual client who'd been to treatment a handful of times, and she said, he's just not ready. And just kind of I think people that had worked with him, like let them off the hook, so to speak, right? Because we all feel that way. Like, what did I miss? Where did I mess up? And she was like, oh, he just wasn't ready. And I was like, oh. And then we talk so much too in the field about like finding the program that's the right fit. I think this is a really beautiful example of that. Jonathan is a beautiful example of that. Just those two other centers, they're great. And some people go through their programs.
And it worked
and
beautifully.
It works.
Sure. Yeah. I bet their outcomes are stellar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then for Jonathan, that just wasn't it.
Yeah.
And that's a hard reality, I think, especially because it is expensive and it is inaccessible and it is so much work. But it comes back to his, like, I don't have another one in me.
Yeah.
Right.
When he said that therapist really found his nugget. Like,
I bet, right? It's like, oh, there's the little thread. We got to pull it. We do have one question. Is there still a 12-step program, SA, that's based around sex addicts to abstain from all sex?
So there is a great question. There is SA, but then there's SAA, then there's SLAA, then there's SCA. There's actually now a number of anonymous programs specifically for sexual behavior as the focus, but the main difference is going to be a little bit in their target audience, but also mostly in how they define sobriety. At its most basic, SA, so 1A, SA has the strictest definition of sobriety. They define it, and they have their right to do that, and anyone that wants to work this program, they choose it knowing what they're getting themselves into. And they have the strictest definition of sobriety. It is, sobriety is defined as no sex with anyone but their spouse, which they do still intentionally define that as between a man and a woman. So a lot of LGBTQ would say, I'm out. Right? It is between their married spouse and also no sex with self. So masturbation is always in an SA program, always going to be off the table.
Yeah.
Okay? So SA is very strict. I know a lot of people have gotten sober in SA and it's what they needed.
Sure.
That being said, SAA and then SLAA and then SCA, the things that really differ from them, and then they have their each differences, but all three of those allow the individual to define their own definition of what's sobriety for them and allow them to change it over time. So someone could work SAA, for example, and in fact define it like SAA for a time and say, for now, masturbation's off the table.
None.
For now, sex with anyone is off the table. But if eventually, with consultation with a sponsor, therapist, their group, whatever, they are starting to navigate what does healthy sex look like for me? What is still compulsive? What is out of control and probably never going to be on the table? What could I start moving into like a boundary that I'm careful around? What is actually going to be intentionally, I'm going to go for that because it's part of my sexual health plan.
Right.
As part of recovery, they need sex. It can't be, I don't want to create monks.
Right.
I'm not looking for that. And so SA, SLAA, and SCA.
What's
all
the
of
other
those
A
allow.
in SAA?
Well, there's Sex Addicts Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous,
Okay.
and I forget which
Sex
one's which.
and Love
but
Addiction, I know, is
then
one of them.
Yeah, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous is SLAA. Then SCA is Sexually Compulsive Anonymous. And that one was created by gay men. And I would say gay men for gay men, but actually SCA has very much broadened, and now it's very much for anyone LGBTQ or straight that just needs a good program for sexual compulsivity. But it is a lot of LGBTQ that are attending, and so therefore they're defining their sexual definitions as what they need.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very LGBTQ friendly.
I feel like we could talk about this all day.
Yeah,
there's like
we
so
could.
many different facets, and man, there's like so many rabbit holes I would love to venture down, but we are at time. We don't have any more questions online. So, unless you have any other final thoughts.
Too many.
Yeah.
Don't
Fair.
open me up again.
Fair. Well, thank you so much. This
Thank you.
was incredibly fascinating.
Good.
A topic, I mean, I'll admit, like, I didn't know a lot about, certainly.
Sure.
And just the more clarity on the pathways and the interaction has been incredibly helpful. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you to Stone Cottage Studios and BCH and the city of Boulder and all of you that are online and watching the recording. Keep coming back. We have another Ask an Expert in July and hope to see you there.